Welcome to This is Supercritical, a podcast where experience, equity, and expertise converge to examine current trends in the cannabis industry. You can find all of our podcasts on your favorite streaming service and at supercritical.agency, your one-stop destination for all things cannabis.
In our inaugural year of This is Supercritical, we had lots of interesting conversations with industry leaders across many sectors, from banking to branding. At the conclusion of each podcast, we asked our guests, what's the most supercritical issue facing the cannabis industry today? For this month's episode, we looked back on 2024 to see what issues our guests found most prevalent. Here's what they had to say.
Name 3 things that are supercritical to surviving and thriving in the cannabis industry right now.
Capital, authenticity, purpose.
Nice.
I'm going to take it to the marketing and branding expertise, and I'm going to say a couple of things about that. The first is marketing and branding is like horticulture. You can't just plant something and leave it alone and expect it to be great. So once you've invested the time and energy in building a brand, look after it, prune it. Does it need more sunlight? Does it need more shade, more water and hydration, or less? Constantly look after your brand and its hygiene and health to make sure that it's evolving and growing in the way that you want it to grow. And then the second thing I'll say, and I think you've already kind of hit this point and landed it really well, is hire the best professionals you can afford to get it right at the start. And if you maybe are already in progress, it's not too late. Bring them in now and have them renovate what you've already built and make some smart decisions and get those honest, brutal truths out on the table so you can solve them and start building a brand that really works. And the last thing I'll say is this is a commercial business, right? I am not an artist. I am a creative marketer. So we're in the business of selling things, making things, and marketing things. So get the data points, get the research, get the insights that will arm your partners to help them really do that for you. Because our greatest joy in the world is not necessarily winning a big creative award. It's when your sales go through the roof and we get rehired because you get to expand and you're growing, and we've done our job and what we needed to do for you.
I think it's cash. It's absolutely cash. 280E is an unfair structural barrier in this industry that constrains
Extremely unfair.
Yeah, and then you have the constraints in the capital markets that are particularly challenging for cannabis because a lot of institutional investors can't touch cannabis while it's federally illegal. I think that will change someday, but in the interim, it really is companies having enough cash to grow their business. And 280E, when 280E leaves the room, which I hope it is this year, I think that will be a game changer for the industry.
I've thought a lot about this, and hopefully this isn't a cop-out of an answer, but I want to stay away from the regulatory framework, legalization, and all of those things. I think what I would say is the most critical is I feel the industry has constantly chased, well, when this one thing happens, everything will be good. And I just think that even with greater legalization, better regulations, a better framework to doing business in this space, the floor is going to continue to shift and change for a really long time. So I would say, from my opinion, the biggest or most super critical issue is, stop waiting for the smoking gun and prepare yourself for the potential paths that this industry can go, and prepare yourself, as many have done, that it's just going to continue to shift. It's all the problems aren't going to be solved. And I think that many know this, and probably everybody knows this, but even with like federal regulation, there's still going to be a lot of challenges and a long road ahead. So I don't know what this issue is. Maybe like patience. A lot of people in this industry have patience, and they're strong, and they've been standing here a long time waiting for a lot of changes, and things have evolved and changed, but I think it's still a long road ahead.
Regulatory mayhem. Just mayhem.
Mayhem.
I'm with the government, and I'm here to mess everything up for you.
And that's about where we are today. And we just don't know how it's going to resolve itself. It's not a stable environment, regulatory environment. It's a very unstable regulatory environment. And it means that the best constructed business plan today might be completely obsolete a month later. I think from at least my perspective, that's probably the thing that haunts me the most. And that's one of the reasons why I think we turned away from the United States and toward the European Union. It's larger, but it's also more stable in terms of that regulation.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that will keep you up at night because you know it's imminent and it's constant. I would think that keeping your eye on the ball for the long run is very much about this is a category that hasn't been developed yet, and you will want to work towards a vision that you believe in terms of what you think is the landscape going to look like. Like imagine that we don't have alcohol, that somebody comes out with ethanol today and figures out that you can actually have a lot of fun with it. You won't know that there will be categories such as wine, beer, cocktails. Like this is still open territory, and I think that's the great opportunity. It is a several decades kind of process, but that's also like the most, I would think, the long run consideration would be the most important.
So you think we're going past grape gummies and lemon gummies?
Oh, too radical that.
You go first, Sabrina.
I would say sorry, wait, can you repeat the question?
What's the most super critical part?
I would say for us, it's credit laws. I think we really need to see credit laws in this industry because it's like what Lex was alluding to. It's like, we're seeing in multiple states, not just California, of, people kind of following this cycle of ordering a lot of product, never paying, going out of business, leaving us high and dry. And it's like in any other industry, like that wouldn't be the case. It's like if someone doesn't pay, they lose their license, and then they're blacklisted from serving as executives in companies, yada, yada, where like cannabis, that's not the case. There's so many people who order all our product, sell it, rack up these big invoices with us, thousands of other brands, and then just go out of business and then reopen a business under a different name. And it's like, this really, it's very cyclical. It keeps happening. And, it makes it really challenging, especially us, like we're a small, medium-sized brand. We don't have a ton of outside funding. And so, when we're holding hundreds of thousands of dollars of bad debt that we may not ever collect on, it really is impacting our business and preventing us from being able to add more SKUs, add new states, add new talent to the team. And so I think it'd be imperative for the cannabis industry to introduce credit laws.
Absolutely agree.
All of that. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It is the most important thing. It is the most super critical
Thanks, Lex.
Our industry. Just everything Sabrina said. It's like we can't bring on new talent. We can't launch an edible. It's like if we're holding $500,000-$600,000 in debt for these other companies that it seems like every week we have customers going out of business. So the market's definitely in a contraction, and we're just kind of like holding on to our seats and kind of waiting for this bit of the ride to be over and return to growth. But yeah, I think the whole industry is really going through a major change right now. And I think the fact that there is kind of some movement on the federal regulatory side means that we could get some relief, in regards to tax liability. But besides that, it's just, we're just in a wait and see.
So it's
the big question.
It's a big question. It's a question I was expecting, obviously, sitting here today. And in my view, the most super critical item is to know your jurisdiction. And you need to know it at every single level. You need to know what's happening on the federal level. You need to know what's happening at the state level. And you even need to know what's happening at your local level as well. And if you, while going through and making sure you know each of those pieces, have good relationships with those that are the decision makers at each of those levels, and have the ability to make sure that they understand, they're educated, and they know what they're doing in terms of influencing policy making the changes in the law? Does it make sense? Is it going to work? Who's supposed to be responsible? To me, that is the most super critical piece, because then you can operate today, you can influence what is tomorrow, and you can plan for what is to come in the future.
Facing the operators themselves.
Mhm.
Well, I think the government restrictions is the biggest thing, particularly with the tax environment the way it is and the legality of cannabis federally. Really, really hurts us in the finance industry. Banks won't lend to us. Uh, Very few banks are even involved or allow us to have accounts in the state. You have to find a state chartered bank. You have to get involved with one. I mean, any financing we get has to be done ancillary. Like I have to borrow money privately, or, do it based upon putting up other collateral. There's nothing I can do that relates to cannabis and to the banking industry at this stage of the game.
I agree. For Supercritical's clients, capital raising is one of the biggest challenges.
Right. It's been really, really a tough situation for us, and everything in cannabis is amazingly expensive. Like we call it a green tax. So if a piece of machinery would cost $100,000, because we're cannabis, it's going to be $200,000. So there's it makes things a lot more difficult than if we had easy access to funding, and in our dispensaries, if we could use credit cards. We can't. It's still a cash environment. I mean, there's that ATM usage, where actually people are using debit cards, but it's being run on an ATM rail. I don't do that because it's just not the right way to go. But I think that once the banking industry opens up and the feds relax the tax basis for these cannabis companies, I think it'll be a lot better. To me, that's the most important.
Oh, is there just one? I mean, if there's one, it has to be cash right now. We've kind of already talked about that. Raising capital, cash. I think those are sort of widely known by everybody. I think that the tax burden is really catching up with some companies if they haven't paid their federal taxes. I think that's a kind of a coming storm, and I think tax accountants who work in controversy and tax attorneys who work in controversy are going to be very, very busy for a long time to come. I think this is a coming storm, and I think it's perhaps not considered as much as it should be in M&A transactions.
Well, I would say there are two. Number one, federal legalization. I think that is how it happens and the flow and the pace. And so what we're advocating for from federal legalization standard is ensuring that when a federal bill comes out, that it's very clear that states are still allowed to have their own programs, have their own equity programs, so that there's not any conflict with any constitutional issues with respect to how the states have been doing it. And then we're also advocating for interstate commerce to only be open to equity businesses and small businesses, right? So we see equity businesses and small businesses as the core of what should be the cannabis, marketplace. And that while big businesses and MSOs certainly have a place, that they should not be dominating or, strangling out small businesses and equity businesses. And based on data, we know that the only way that can happen is if there is priority and early access for small businesses and equity businesses. And so I think that how that plays out is super critical to the cannabis industry. And
Definitely.
And the second thing is hemp. Hemp is our hemp is kind of like cannabis's spicy little brother that might act up a little bit, and so, you love him, right? But he's kind of causing some problems, and so with the hemp and the farm bill, and hemp advocacy, certainly the intent around that with everybody in the beginning was to allow non-intoxicating, cannabinoids to be readily available to anybody who needed them. And what it has turned into is a free-for-all, finding any loophole that can be exploited in order to really, create something now that has become an incredible threat against regulated cannabis. And how that is squared and how that is and it's strange because there are some good and there are some bad parts to it, meaning that I think hemp and CBD and even, some of the, what I consider kind of the adulterated cannabinoids have gone a long way to open up the conversation around cannabis and for people to see that the sky does not fall, even if there's lots of cannabis products all around and readily available. But at the same time, I think in many ways it does undermine the regulation and the strict regulation, and it creates an incredible hypocrisy within the cannabis industry and between entrepreneurs about what their standing is and how they're able to survive and thrive in the industry. And so I'm very, very curious about whether or not that loophole is going to be closed, in the Farm Bill going forward. And you've certainly seen it's like been used to pit us against each other, quite a bit too. So, and it's really interesting. We're getting to the point in, drug policy and cannabis policy where it's getting very complicated, right? Where before it used to be cannabis legalization good, prohibition bad. And now there are all of these different pieces and nuances to the industry, to the laws and what's happening. And it's fascinating from a legal perspective. It can be frustrating from a business perspective, and very, intriguing from a future perspective of, what this industry is going to look like.
I was being slightly facetious, but we did just talk about it. I actually do think that we're at this inflection point because you know how for years and years people predicted that cannabis beverage would be the next big thing, but it never happened, right? It never happened. But then suddenly we had these hemp-derived beverages, and guess what? It's the next big thing. But is the cannabis industry, I guess, benefiting from that, right? Because what's interesting is what I think it also proves is that once you take it out of the dispensary and put it into traditional outlets, that's how you win the beverage game, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But my point is now it's not a theory. Like we have real data now. That can be a supercritical juncture, right? We are at a supercritical juncture because if we're going the hemp route, yeah, there's a possibility that these licenses, these cannabis licenses, are relatively valueless.
Well, I think even more broadly, it's a matter of distribution and how you're getting the product to the end consumer, because the hemp side has such an advantage over the traditional market and THC beverages. So it's the access to it, I think, that has really put some wins into that, behind that.
Yeah. I mean, Sparky, you brought up CPG experience. If you're a person that has rock star CPG experience, would you rather go work at P&G or would you rather work in cannabis?
Speaking as that person, I'd rather work in cannabis, but but no, I get to where you're going. I mean, especially
But his
now.
bank account says differently.
Yeah, so exactly. My bank account says is P&G on the phone.
Yeah,
That's what my bank account says. Yeah, no, it definitely it's tough sledding right now. But going back to that beverage, I think the other thing to really look at is Minnesota. They're allowing on premise right next to alcohol, and that's kind of always been our thesis. We tried to put together a beverage project out in Colorado. And that was really it. It was like, you have to meet people where they're at. I don't want to go to a consumption lounge with my friends because not all my friends consume weed.
Yeah.
And then if I want to go to the bar and I don't drink, but I love weed, I either have to do all my medicating outside or it's still just kind of clumsy. You can do it, but it isn't great. And now that, I look at Minnesota as, hey, eyes on that, because I think that's where you're seeing a lot of this.
Yeah.
Hey, man, cannabis beverages are going through the ceiling.
Thanks to everybody who tuned in this year, and do us a favor and let us know what you think the most supercritical factors are facing the industry down in the comments. Here's hoping we all have a prosperous 2025.